In the dim light of early morning, panic erupted as I scurried across the cold, tiled floor, frantically gathering up damp paper towels. Every desperate motion was punctuated by the sound of my racing heart, a staccato rhythm echoing the chaos within. The water, a symbol of spilled secrets and shattered calm, spread like a dark omen beneath my trembling hands. I had to erase every trace of that liquid reminder, to pretend that nothing had gone wrong, even though every fiber of my being screamed otherwise. Before I could even catch my breath, a harsh, jarring voice shattered the fragile silence. "What the hell are you doing in here? You don't get to eat my food!" Jade's words thundered through the room, her tone a mix of fury and derision. In that moment, time seemed to slow as she burst into view, her presence both terrifying and all-consuming. Her eyes burned with an intensity that left no room for mercy, and I could almost feel the venom in every syllable as she advanced. With a swift, brutal kick, she struck my knee. The impact was like a lightning bolt, a sudden, searing pain that shot through me, forcing me to collapse onto the hard floor. I instinctively lowered my head, desperate to avoid the full force of her wrath. But as if that wasn't enough, another blow landed squarely on my back. My body jerked in shock, and tears welled in my eyes as I clutched at the tiny cracks in the cold tile, seeking some semblance of support in that harsh moment. Each thud of her boot against my side reverberated through my bones, mingling with the unspoken agony of memories I wished I could forget. In those few heartbeats of raw terror, I felt the weight of a troubled past, a past filled with betrayal, cruelty, and endless nights of despair. The relentless barrage of Jade's anger seemed to mirror a history I had long tried to escape, a history where every harsh word and violent gesture had chipped away at the remnants of hope that I once clung to. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the inner torment that gnawed at me, a silent scream echoing in the recesses of my soul. I scrambled to my feet, my mind a blur of fragmented thoughts and raw emotions. The chaotic interplay of fear and sorrow pulsed beneath my skin, threatening to overwhelm me. I could barely understand why Jade's outburst cut so deeply, as if her cruelty was driven by something far darker than mere anger. What forces propelled her to act with such ferocity? Was it a reflection of her own inner demons, or something more sinister lurking beneath the surface of this forsaken place? The room around me seemed to close in, a suffocating confinement of cold, unyielding walls, and the persistent drip of water echoing like distant, mournful cries. I tried to steady my shaking hands, to wipe away the tears that blurred my vision, but every attempt only heightened the raw, aching despair that had taken root within me. In that harrowing moment, the spilled water on the floor was not just a minor accident. It was a stark metaphor for my life, a life marred by chaos, abuse, and the relentless assault of forces I could neither control nor escape. Every inch of my body trembled with anxiety and fear as I fought an internal battle between the instinct to flee and the paralyzing dread that kept me rooted to the spot. My mind churned with questions that seemed to have no answers. Who was Jade, really? What deep, dark turmoil fueled her relentless aggression? And more hauntingly, how had I come to be trapped in a cycle of torment that left me feeling utterly powerless? In that moment, the vivid images of past scars, both visible and hidden, flashed before my eyes, a tapestry of suffering that had long defined my existence. The pain was all-consuming, not only a physical reminder of every brutal encounter, but also a visceral echo of a past I could never fully escape. Yet beneath the layers of terror and despair, a fragile ember of defiance began to glow. Even as Jade's shadow loomed large, threatening to smother any remnants of hope, I knew that deep inside, something within me stirred, a quiet, persistent desire for freedom, for a life unburdened by the cruelty of this relentless abuse. But the stark contrast between the cold, indifferent floor and the searing heat of my inner anguish created a dissonance that was almost unbearable. Each heartbeat, heavy with pain and memory, served as a reminder of both my vulnerability and my desperate will to survive. And as I lay there, struggling to regain a semblance of control, I couldn't help but wonder, could there be a way out of this nightmare? Could the mysterious forces that had conspired to make me a captive of my own despair be challenged, perhaps even overcome? Beneath the surface of my present agony lies a past cloaked in relentless betrayal and bitter sorrow. A past that has etched itself onto my soul, leaving scars that no outward healing can ever erase. I remember the cold nights when the whispers of broken promises echoed through our dilapidated home, each word a reminder of a family shattered by deceit. My father, once a figure I believed embodied protection and strength, revealed himself to be a harbinger of pain. In a moment of careless weakness, he shattered the fragile trust I had in him, betraying my mother in a way that forever altered the dynamics of our lives. I still recall the scene with vivid clarity. A night when shadows danced ominously along the walls as my father's indiscretion unraveled the delicate fabric of our once united family. My mother, with her tender heart and unwavering hope, had returned home to find the unthinkable. A betrayal so raw and painful that it forced her into a state of quiet, unyielding despair. In her grief and mounting fury, she directed her anguish at the one she held most dear, me. I became a silent scapegoat for sins I never committed, a vessel for the pent-up rage that filled our household like a toxic fog. Every day thereafter, as I navigated the endless maze of abuse and neglect, I struggled to understand why I was deemed unworthy of love. My mother's eyes, once soft and caring, had transformed into mirrors of bitter disapproval. Every whispered accusation of theft, every harsh word uttered in the heat of her uncontrollable despair, chipped away at the very core of my self-worth. I grew up feeling small, diminished by the belief that I was nothing more than a burden, a constant reminder of my father's transgressions. I was trapped in a living nightmare, confined not by physical walls alone, but by the invisible chains of guilt and unworthiness. The home that should have been a sanctuary turned into a prison where the echoes of my parents' failed love haunted every corner. Each bruise, each scar was not just a physical testament to the abuse I endured, but a silent chronicle of a life burdened by sorrow and regret. The relentless cycle of blame and punishment eroded my spirit, leaving me to wander the corridors of my mind, searching for fragments of hope amid the wreckage of my shattered identity. In those long, desolate nights, I would lie awake, listening to the creaks of the old house, the sound of my own labored breathing mingling with the distant cries of a wounded heart. I questioned every moment. Why did I have to bear the weight of my father's sins? How could I, a mere child, become the target of a mother's grief? Each unanswered question deepened the void within me, a void that seemed impossible to fill, with even the smallest measure of comfort. Over time, the relentless barrage of neglect and harsh judgment forged within me a deep-seated belief that I was undeserving of love, destined to wander alone in a world that had cast me aside. Yet in the depths of that darkness, a quiet, insidious transformation began. The pain and isolation, though overwhelming, gradually became the crucible in which my identity was painfully refined. I learned to internalize every harsh word, every lash of anger, and in doing so, I discovered an inner resilience that I never knew existed. It was not a triumphant revelation, but a bitter, reluctant acknowledgement that the scars I carried were a part of me, reminders of a past I could never entirely escape, but also markers of my enduring strength. Even now, when the memories surge like a tidal wave, I catch myself wondering if there was ever a possibility for a different life, a life where I might have been cherished instead of condemned, where my father's betrayal would not have marred my destiny. This haunting past, with its relentless echoes of betrayal and abuse, has sculpted me into someone who stands at the crossroads of despair and defiance. I am haunted by the ghosts of my childhood, each one whispering secrets of what might have been, yet each also fortifying the fragile ember of hope that refuses to die. In sharing these painful recollections, I invite you, dear listener, to witness the genesis of my struggle, a struggle that is not defined solely by the brutality inflicted upon me, but by the relentless pursuit of a love and a freedom that seemed so far beyond reach. It is a story woven with threads of sorrow and resilience, a tapestry of memories that beckon us to ponder the true cost of betrayal and the quiet yet powerful journey toward reclaiming oneself. Every day unfolded like a suffocating cycle of domination and despair, a relentless routine that stripped away not only my clothes, but the remnants of my identity. The moment the cold, unyielding metal of the crate sealed behind me, I knew I was locked away from any semblance of freedom. It was a prison not built of stone or iron, but of fear and cruelty, where every hour marked another step deeper into a life defined by punishment. The crate was my only refuge and yet also my cell, a cramped, dark space where I was forced to curl up, unable to escape the constant reminder of my own captivity. I was denied even the simplest dignity. My body, once a source of pride, had become a canvas for abuse. Every morning I was stripped bare, my meager clothing taken away without mercy, as if I were not even human, but an object to be controlled. In that moment, I would see myself in a broken mirror, reflecting the image of someone unworthy, someone lost to a fate that I had never chosen. As I lay there, the bitter chill of the crate seeped into my bones, intensifying the internal conflict. Raging within, my mind was a battleground where a desperate yearning for escape clashed with the crushing resignation that perhaps this was all there ever would be. I found myself questioning whether I deserved freedom, or if the scars, both visible and hidden, were a lifelong reminder that I was meant to be subjugated. Every bruise, every mark left by a cruel hand, whispered that I was not enough, that the world had already decided my fate before I had a chance to shape it. Yet, amid the overwhelming despair, there flickered a stubborn ember of defiance. In the depths of that dark, confining space, I began to recognize a resilience I never thought I possessed. Even as I struggled to accept the relentless punishment, a small, trembling voice within dared to dream of a different life. A life where I could break free of these chains and reclaim the dignity that had been stolen from me. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. A secret promise of escape that seemed so far beyond my grasp, yet tantalizingly within reach. Each day was punctuated by a series of tormenting rituals. There were moments when the abuse would escalate without warning, sudden, brutal reminders that any defiance would be met with swift retribution. I learned to brace myself for these moments, my heart pounding in my ears as I awaited the next blow. But even in those harrowing instances, while my body trembled in pain, my mind would flicker with thoughts of escape. I wondered if there might be a hidden path out of this nightmare, a chance to step into the light and leave the darkness behind. The contradiction was agonizing. Every act of submission deepened the wounds, yet every spark of rebellion risked a punishment that threatened to erase all hope. In the quiet aftermath of each assault, when the echoes of pain still reverberated, in my limbs I would lie awake, consumed by a torrent of thoughts. I questioned the purpose of my suffering and pondered whether this endless cycle of degradation was all there was to my existence. Was I doomed to be nothing more than a broken vessel of despair? Or could there be a way to reclaim my worth, even if it meant confronting the demons of my past? These moments of introspection were as sharp as the sting of a lash, cutting through the haze of numbness that threatened to swallow me whole. The daily rituals of abuse served not only to break me, physically, but also to shatter any remnants of self-esteem I might have nurtured. I had become intimately familiar with the sensation of being dehumanized, of feeling that my body was a territory over which someone else ruled with absolute, unyielding authority. Yet, it was in these moments of profound vulnerability that I also discovered the depth of my own inner strength. The fire of my spirit, though dimmed by relentless punishment, still smoldered beneath the layers of despair. It was a silent vow, that despite the oppressive weight of each passing day, I would continue to fight, even if only in the recesses of my mind. The duality of my existence was a constant reminder of the cruelty that defined my daily life. I was simultaneously crushed by the brutal reality of my circumstances and lifted by the faint, persistent hope that somewhere, beyond these walls of torment, lay the possibility of a better tomorrow. That glimmer of hope, though barely perceptible, was enough to keep my inner voice alive, urging me to believe that my current state was not the end of my story. In that cold, confined space, as I lay in the darkness with only the echoes of my own pain for company, I made a silent promise to myself: to endure, to remember every moment of agony, and to use it as fuel in the quest for freedom. Even as the cycle of domination and despair continued to shape my days, that secret ember of resilience whispered that one day I would break free. And until that day came, I would hold on to the belief that, despite everything, I was more than the sum of my suffering. A soul with the capacity to rise from the ashes and claim a future that was mine alone. The moment of reckoning came in a heartbeat. A moment so brutal it etched itself into the very marrow of my being. I stood, barely able to catch my breath, as Jade's voice sliced through the stillness like a sharpened blade. "Go fetch your foot from the pond," she snarled, her words dripping with cruel amusement. Her tone was not one of instruction, but of mockery. A wicked, hollow laughter that echoed around the barren room and chilled my soul more than the biting air outside ever could. I felt my heart plummet into a darkness that I had never known before. Every instinct within me screamed to run, to hide, to beg for mercy. But there was no escape from the grim decree that now sealed my fate. I stepped out into the frigid morning, each footstep an agonizing reminder that my defiance had a price. The corridor led me to the backyard, a bleak, desolate expanse dominated by a small, murky pond that reflected a distorted image of the world above. The water lay stagnant and uninviting, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple that hinted at unseen depths. Approaching the pond felt as if I were walking into a nightmare made manifest. The cold, damp air brushed against my skin like the icy fingers of death itself, and the silent witness of that water promised only further torment. My mind raced. Every second was stretched out, filled with a paralyzing fear that threatened to smother me. With trembling hands, I knelt by the edge, and for a brief, excruciating moment, time slowed to a crawl. I stared into the dark, murky depths, as if expecting the water to swallow me whole, to erase the shame and agony that clung to my every thought. Then, with a shuddering breath, I plunged my hand into the water. The liquid was frigid, a shock that ran like a bolt of lightning through my already numbed limbs. The cold seeped deep into my flesh, mixing with the sharp sting of a pain so intense it seemed almost surreal. I reached forward, guided by a desperate, disjointed thought that obeyed Jade's cruel command without question. In that instant, my fingers brushed against something unyielding, a severed foot, disfigured and grotesque in the pallid light of dawn. The sight was both repulsive and heartbreaking. It was as if a part of me, once whole and cherished, had been so utterly discarded by fate. My mind, clouded by shock and despair, recoiled at the sight. A surge of anguish flooded over me, a maelstrom of betrayal, loss, and a deep-seated sorrow that threatened to consume me whole. The sharp, metallic tang of blood mingled with the cold water, and every detail of that horrific moment burned itself into my memory. Even as I stared at that grim relic of my disobedience, I could hear Jade's laughter ringing in the distance, an eerie, haunting sound that pierced the silence and echoed the cruelty of her dominance. The laughter was like a dirge for my spirit, melody of malice that underscored the severity of my punishment. It was a reminder that every act of defiance, however small, came with a cost. The laughter reverberated in my ears, interlacing with the soft, haunting lapping of water against the pond's edge. I could almost feel it wrapping around my heart, squeezing tighter with every passing second, as if to ensure that the lesson was indelibly imprinted within me. I felt a profound emptiness, a gnawing despair that threatened to overwhelm every thought. In that surreal moment, the brutal physicality of my punishment merged with the relentless torment of my inner world. I questioned whether I was ever destined to break free from this cycle of abuse, a relentless cycle of obedience and punishment, where every act of defiance was met with the most horrific price. The cold water, the severed limb, the haunting echo of Jade's laughter, all were symbols of a fate that seemed inescapable. Yet, amid the overwhelming cruelty, a faint whisper stirred within me, a whisper of defiance, of a lingering hope that perhaps this punishment, as unbearable as it was, might eventually catalyze a change. Even as the searing pain and the bitterness of betrayal threatened to drown me, that tiny ember of resistance refused to be snuffed out. It was as if, in the darkest depths of despair, my soul clung to the possibility of transformation, a future where I might one day reclaim the pieces of myself that had been so ruthlessly torn apart. As I sat there by the pond, the weight of that brutal lesson pressed down on me with a force I could scarcely endure. I knew then that every choice had its price, and that my struggle was far from over. The searing shock of this moment was not just punishment, it was a turning point. It forced me to confront the harsh reality of my existence and, in that confrontation, ignited the smallest spark of rebellion. That spark, fragile as it was, held the promise of change, a possibility that my fate was not sealed forever in cruelty and despair. The world around me blurred into a chaotic haze of pain and terror as I plunged deeper into the relentless grip of the cold pond. With every desperate kick and flailing movement, the water threatened to pull me down into a dark, crushing abyss. The icy liquid was unyielding, a stark, merciless force that pressed against my body, making each breath a monumental effort. I could feel my heart pounding wildly against my ribcage, echoing the frantic rhythm of my thoughts as panic took hold. In that suffocating moment, I found myself teetering on the edge of oblivion, drowning not just in water, but in the overwhelming weight of despair. The once familiar world had transformed into a merciless sea of uncertainty, where every struggle against the current felt like a futile battle. I could barely muster the strength to fight. My limbs, heavy with the pain of previous abuses, betrayed me as I thrashed helplessly in the icy depths. As darkness began to close in around me, a vivid memory from my childhood pierced through the terror. A soft, reassuring voice echoing the wisdom of a time when hope was still possible. I recalled my father's gentle, albeit distant, advice. When you feel overwhelmed by the currents of life, sometimes all you need to do is hold your breath, calm your heart, and let the storm pass. In that near-drowning moment, his words mingled with the spectral echoes of a past that now seemed both painfully distant and achingly near. I clung to that fragile recollection as if it were a lifeline. The memory was not of comfort alone, but a bittersweet reminder of simpler times, when survival was not measured by the weight of cruelty and constant punishment. As I struggled against the overwhelming force of the water, my mind began to shift. The raw, paralyzing panic slowly gave way to a reluctant acceptance, a silent acknowledgement that, to survive, I must yield, if only for a moment, to the current. Every second felt like an eternity as I allowed the water to envelop me, drawing me deeper into its cold embrace. The sensation was both horrifying and strangely familiar, echoing the numerous times I had felt engulfed by despair in the confines of my torment. My breathing, ragged and desperate, turned into a measured, deliberate rhythm as I fought to quell the inner tumult. I realized that in order to escape this lethal grip, I needed to trust my body to do what it had done so many times before: survive. In the murky depths, I could feel the sting of every scrape and bruise, the physical pain now merging with the aching, unresolved sorrow of my past. It was as if the water itself was a mirror, reflecting the cumulative weight of every injustice, every cruel word, and every act of unyielding domination. Yet, in that profound darkness, my inner voice began to stir once more. The childhood advice that had once been a distant murmur transformed into a persistent whisper. Relax, breathe, let your body guide you. The contrast was stark, the brutal present, defined by the icy water and suffocating fear, set against the fading memories of a time when survival was taught as a necessary art, not a luxury. Slowly, with tremendous effort, I allowed my mind to focus on the steady beat of my heart, each pulse a reminder that I was still alive, still fighting. The initial shock of near drowning began to recede, replaced by a sober, almost resigned determination to cling to life. In that precarious balance between life and death, I experienced an epiphany. The struggle was not just against the physical force of the water, but against the internal tide of despair that had so long threatened to claim me. I recognized that my survival depended on embracing this moment, not as a defeat, but as a profound, transformative experience. The cold, unrelenting water that had nearly broken me now became a crucible in which my spirit was tested, and perhaps reborn. Every movement, every slow, deliberate breath served as a testament to my unwavering instinct for self-preservation. The fear that had once gripped me so completely was gradually replaced by a muted, contemplative resolve. In the dark silence beneath the surface, I found a glimmer of acceptance, a recognition that this harrowing experience, as brutal as it was, might mark the beginning of a shift in my fate. And so, as I finally emerged from the cold, murky water, shivering and soaked in both pain and hope, I carried with me the bittersweet realization that the journey toward a different life was fraught with agony, but also with the promise of rebirth. The echoes of my past and the relentless surge of the present had forged within me an indomitable will to survive, a silent vow that no matter how deep the darkness, I would continue to fight for the light that lay beyond. In the aftermath of my near drowning, when the echo of water and my ragged breaths had barely begun to fade, new voices broke through the oppressive silence of my isolated torment. It started with a hesitant murmur, a soft but insistent call that cut through the gloom like a beacon in the dark. I could hear footsteps approaching, their cadence unfamiliar, yet carrying a promise of both conflict and hope. It was Axel Morty, his voice steady and imbued with a peculiar blend of authority and empathy, and Terry, whose tone carried urgency as well as a hint of compassion. "Are you all right?" Axel's gentle question resonated in the still air, a stark contrast to the harshness that had ruled my days. His presence, unexpected and almost surreal in its calm assurance, disrupted the cycle of abuse that had so long defined my existence. I could feel the internal tremors of conflicted emotions, a reluctant hope battling with the scars of relentless torment. Terry's voice followed shortly after, layered with an undercurrent of tension. "We need to get you somewhere safe. This isn't where you belong," he urged, his tone both a command and a promise. Their words stirred something deep within me, a mingling of relief at not being alone, and apprehension about what new dynamics these voices might herald. In that fragile moment, I sensed that the boundaries of my suffering were about to expand, as if the invisible walls that had kept my pain confined were beginning to crumble. Axel knelt beside me, his eyes locking with mine in a silent exchange of understanding that went beyond words. "I know what you've been through," he said softly, almost as if he were speaking to a wounded child rather than a battle-hardened soul. "But you deserve more than this endless cycle of despair." His words, tender yet resolute, stirred a flicker of resistance within me, a spark that dared to believe that redemption might lie in a place far removed from my current hell. The introduction of these new voices also brought with it an unspoken revelation. I was not the only one marked by the cruelty of our pack's hierarchy. There was a structure here, a complex web of loyalty and power that extended far beyond the isolated brutality I had known. In whispered conversations between Axel and Terry, hints of deeper pack dynamics emerged, of a community torn between the relentless cruelty of a few and the potential for a collective redemption that could one day heal even the deepest wounds. Terry's eyes, sharp with determination, scanned the horizon as if reading an invisible map of our future. "There's a way out of this. A possibility for change," he murmured, his voice low and earnest. "But it starts with trust and the courage to stand against those who have held us captive for so long." His words resonated with me, even as my heart battled against the ingrained habit of submission. It was as if the promise of escape was both a distant dream and an immediate necessity, a paradox that forced me to confront the conflicting parts of my own nature. I listened, torn between a desire to cling to the familiar pain that had defined me and a desperate longing to break free from the chains of my past. Axel's steady reassurance provided a counterpoint to my inner tumult. "I can help you, but you must be willing to trust us," he said, his tone imbued with both authority and a rare tenderness that hinted at his own struggles with the pack's cruel dynamics. His words were like a lifeline thrown across the chasm of my despair, inviting me to step into a world where I might finally reclaim some measure of control. In that fragile interlude, the conversation drifted toward the nature of our existence within this pack, a world where power was both a blessing and a curse. "Loyalty here isn't given lightly," Axel continued, his gaze penetrating, as if he were weighing the unspoken truths behind every word. "It's forged in the fires of our shared hardships, but it can also bind us if we let it. We must decide whether to be bound by fear or to choose a path of redemption and collective strength." His words, smooth yet laden with the weight of experience, raised questions in my mind. Could the very structure that had caused so much pain also be the key to our liberation? The arrival of Axel and Terry was like the turning of a page, a transition from solitary suffering to a broader narrative that encompassed not only my own torment, but the lives of all those who had been beaten down by the cruel hand of fate. Their voices, melding compassion with a fierce resolve, hinted at a possibility that the future need not be defined by perpetual abuse. In that moment, I felt the stirring of something new, a glimmer of hope that the cycle of domination might one day be broken, and that perhaps, within the heart of our pack, there lay the potential for both cruelty and redemption. As I lay there, overwhelmed by the mingling of despair and hope, I realized that the journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the prospect of change seemed possible. A possibility that those new voices, with all their hidden depths and complex allegiances, might lead us toward a future where trust, loyalty, and healing could eventually overcome the scars of our past. In the disorienting haze of an agonizing darkness, everything blurred into a single, overwhelming sensation. My consciousness had ebbed away, leaving me adrift in a void where pain, confusion, and terror intermingled. I awoke to a frantic scramble of voices and a pounding heartbeat that seemed to echo the chaos around me. Before I could register the details, I found myself crumpled on cold, rough ground, my body battered and my senses reeling from the brutality of what had just transpired. A pair of strong hands lifted me gently, their touch both soothing and alien. As I struggled to regain awareness, my eyes fluttered open to a scene bathed in uncertain light. I could barely distinguish the contours of a figure looming over me, a rescuer whose presence was both a balm and a cause for deeper mistrust. The rescuer's face, half hidden in shadow, held an expression that was difficult to decipher. Part concern, part guarded resolve, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Stay with me," came a low, steady voice, imbued with an intensity that penetrated the fog of my disorientation. I sensed an urgency, a quiet command that urged me not to slip back into oblivion. The words, though kind, carried the weight of secrets and unspoken histories, and for a moment, I felt both a surge of relief and an unsettling chill of uncertainty. Who was this person? Why would someone extend a hand to rescue me when the world I had known was so steeped in cruelty and betrayal? As the rescuer carefully maneuvered me away from the perilous edge where I had almost drowned, my mind flitted between fragments of fear and a tentative gratitude. I could feel the damp, gritty texture of the ground under my fingers as I clutched at the fabric of my torn clothing, a silent plea for stability amid the chaos. Every sensation was magnified, the cool rush of air against my skin, the steady rhythm of my faltering heartbeat, and even the faint, echoing murmur of distant voices that hinted at further conflict within the pack. I couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected rescue was merely another twist in a long line of deceptions. The rescuer's intentions, though seemingly benevolent, were shrouded in mystery. A part of me, scarred by years of abuse and betrayal, instinctively recoiled from any gesture of kindness. My inner voice, steeped in caution, questioned the authenticity behind that gentle tone. Was this an act of genuine compassion, or a calculated move within the intricate hierarchies of a pack where loyalty was as fickle as it was prized? The rescuers, hands firm yet careful, steadied my trembling form as I was carried to a quieter corner of a dimly lit corridor. Here, the sounds of chaos softened to a murmur, and for a brief, fragile moment, I allowed myself to feel the warmth of relief. But even in this reprieve, uncertainty clung to me like a persistent shadow. My mind raced with questions. What danger had I truly escaped? And what new peril might lie hidden behind this benevolent facade? The internal conflict was palpable. A collision of desperate hope and deep-seated mistrust that had been cultivated over years of suffering. As I lay there, struggling to piece together the fragments of my memory, the rescuer's whispered reassurances continued to echo in my ears. "You're safe now," the voice repeated, as if to convince both me and whoever else might be listening that the nightmare was finally over. Yet, the cadence of those words resonated with an undercurrent of tension, hinting at responsibilities and hidden alliances that extended far beyond my own plight. In that suspended moment, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. I became acutely aware of every detail: the muted glow of flickering overhead lights, the distant murmur of footsteps, some hurried, others measured, and even the soft rustle of fabric as the rescuer adjusted my position. Each sensory detail wove together to create a tapestry of ambiguity, where relief mingled with apprehension, and every whispered word carried the promise of both redemption and further turmoil. Despite the growing warmth of gratitude that began to seep into the edges of my battered heart, the presence of this rescuer left me questioning what lay beneath the surface. The complexity of pack dynamics loomed large in my mind, each new voice adding another layer to an already intricate web of power, betrayal, and reluctant hope. In the midst of confusion, I realized that this rescue was not a simple act of kindness. It was a delicate, precarious step toward an unknown future where alliances could either mend broken souls or shatter them beyond repair. In that silent pause, suspended between despair and a fragile glimmer of hope, I vowed to remain vigilant. For while the immediate threat had receded, the true battle, the battle for trust, loyalty, and ultimately for the reclamation of my own shattered identity, was only just beginning. The rescuer's hands held me with a strength that promised protection, yet the question of his true intent lingered like a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. I awoke to a haze of searing pain and aching memories, a brutal symphony of physical agony and emotional despair that gripped me as if the past had materialized to haunt my every breath. My body, bruised and trembling, lay in the cold embrace of a reality that was both unbearable and strangely familiar. Every muscle ached from the relentless punishment, every bruise a vivid reminder of the cruelty that had defined my existence for so long. In that fragile moment between sleep and full consciousness, my mind began to unravel the tapestry of painful memories. Each thread a story of abuse, betrayal, and the slow erosion of self-worth. The room around me was dim, the soft light filtering in like a reluctant witness to my suffering. As I blinked away the remnants of darkness, images of the past surged forth. A montage of harsh voices, relentless blows, and the perpetual feeling of being less than human. I could almost feel the sting of every lash, the bitter taste of every harsh word that had been etched into my skin and soul. The weight of my memories was a burden that pressed down on me, merging with the physical pain until the two were indistinguishable. Yet, amid this overwhelming tide of despair, a flicker of hope dared to spark within me, a silent, stubborn whisper that promised there might be more to life than this endless cycle of torment. In the quiet moments following my awakening, my inner dialogue roiled with conflicting thoughts. I questioned the fairness of my fate, the cruelty of a past that seemed designed solely to strip me of dignity and self-love. Am I destined to remain broken? I wondered, my thoughts echoing, with the voices of those long gone yet still present in every scar. The memory of my father's betrayal, and my mother's subsequent cruelty, came rushing back, each recollection a bitter pill I was forced to swallow. I remembered the nights filled with cold tears, and the endless echoes of harsh admonitions, all of which had slowly convinced me that I was unworthy of kindness, of love. And yet, in the midst of this internal storm, I also recalled moments, fleeting flashes of warmth, however rare, that hinted at the possibility of healing. The gentle murmur of a caring voice, the unexpected kindness of a rescuer, and the soft, almost imperceptible sigh of relief that followed an act of compassion, all stirred something deep within me. These delicate memories contrasted so sharply with the brutality of my past. They were like small, defiant candles in a vast, dark chamber, each one promising that even the deepest wounds could someday begin to mend. As I lay there, vulnerable and exposed, I felt the raw edges of my pain blend with a budding awareness of my own resilience. The physical agony, each throbbing ache and every pulsing bruise, was a constant, painful reminder of what I had endured, but it was also a testament to my survival. Every wound was a story, every scar a quiet declaration that I had lived through unspeakable horrors and yet still managed to breathe, to feel, to hope. In that moment, I realized that my pain, as excruciating as it was, could be transformed into a foundation upon which I might rebuild a semblance of self-worth. The introspection was both a comfort and a torment. I could not help but question, who am I now, after all this? The answer was shrouded in a dense fog of despair and memory, yet I sensed that beneath the layers of abuse and neglect there was a core, fragile but unyielding, that yearned for redemption. The haunting images of my past, though overwhelmingly painful, began to recede into the background as the possibility of recovery shimmered at the edges of my consciousness. I found myself whispering words of tentative encouragement to my battered self, a quiet mantra of survival that mingled with the rhythmic beating of my heart. Slowly, as if in response to my silent pleas, the oppressive weight of my memories seemed to ease, if only by a fraction. The internal dialogue shifted from one of self-condemnation to a reluctant acceptance that, despite everything, I was still here. I was a survivor. The pain was a part of me, but it did not have to define me entirely. It was in that moment of piercing vulnerability that I realized healing might be possible, even if the scars would remain as solemn reminders of the past. The juxtaposition of my brutal history and my current vulnerability was stark. The vivid images of relentless abuse clashed with the soft, almost imperceptible stirrings of hope that began to emerge in the quiet aftermath of my awakening. It was a delicate, agonizing dance between memory and the desire to move forward, a struggle to reclaim a sense of self amid the ruins of my shattered past. In that moment, I resolved to embrace the possibility of recovery, no matter how small or uncertain it seemed, and to allow the pain to be the crucible from which my future strength would be forged. Thus, with each labored breath, I inched toward an uncertain tomorrow, a future where the echoes of a brutal past might one day give way to the gentle promise of healing, and where every scar told a story of survival and the quiet, enduring hope of redemption. In the quiet aftermath of my ordeal, as I lay on the cold floor with every inch of my body still trembling, a soft, unexpected warmth began to seep into the darkness. It was Axel, his presence a gentle contrast to the harsh cruelty that had defined my every moment. He knelt beside me, his eyes filled with a tenderness I had long forgotten existed in this forsaken world. His hands, warm and steady, brushed lightly across my tear-streaked face as if trying to wipe away not just the grime, but the weight of all my suffering. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice a soothing balm that vibrated deep within my battered soul. The sound of his words was like a gentle lullaby, a tender reassurance amid the lingering echoes of abuse. In that fleeting instant, my inner world, so accustomed to the bitter taste of pain and isolation, hesitated. I sensed a glimmer of something fragile and new stirring inside me, an emerging trust that wavered between caution and hope. As his calloused fingers grazed the side of my cheek, I felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through me. It was as if his touch carried the promise of comfort, a silent vow that perhaps I was more than a broken remnant of my past. His gentle caress, careful and deliberate, invited me to reconsider the darkness that had long seemed impenetrable. I closed my eyes and let the sensations wash over me. The soft pressure of his hand, the rhythmic sound of his steady breathing, and the faint, comforting scent of his cologne mingling with the crisp air around us. Inside, my thoughts swirled, in a delicate dance between caution and an almost desperate yearning for connection. I remembered too well the cold, harsh world that had molded me, where every touch had been a weapon and every word a dagger. Yet now, here was Axel, his presence inexplicably kind, his voice a whisper of solace. I wondered if it was truly possible that someone so genuine could exist in a life otherwise defined by cruelty. The juxtaposition of his compassion against my memories of brutality created a fragile space where hope dared to emerge. "Rest a little," Axel said, his tone both commanding and tender. As he helped me settle into a makeshift resting spot, his hand remained near, as if guarding me against the returning shadows of my past. The gentle rustle of his clothing, the soft warmth of his skin against mine, and the reassuring cadence of his whispers merged into a sensory symphony that momentarily quieted the chaos of my inner torment. I could almost hear my heart daring to beat a little steadier, the rhythm of life slowly reclaiming its place after long moments of disarray. Yet, despite the undeniable comfort Axel offered, an undercurrent of wariness pulsed within me. I recalled too vividly the echoes of abuse that had tainted every interaction for so long. Could this kindness be a prelude to further pain? Or was it perhaps the first genuine gesture of redemption in a world where trust had been a luxury I could scarcely afford? My mind, still scarred by years of relentless suffering, questioned every nuance of this new intimacy. In the silence that followed, as the ambient sounds of our shared refuge mingled with the distant murmur of a world beyond, I found my inner voice slowly softening. I began to murmur hesitant words of gratitude, each syllable trembling on the edge of disbelief. "Thank you," I managed, barely audible, as though fearing that even gratitude might be a betrayal of the self I was so desperate to protect. Axel's gentle smile and the light in his eyes spoke of understanding, a silent promise that he, too, had known the sting of despair and the arduous path toward healing. As the moment stretched into a tentative calm, I let my thoughts wander to the possibility that this delicate bond could break the cycle of relentless abuse. The idea was almost too fragile to hold. A whisper of a promise that perhaps the darkness could one day yield to the soft glow of compassion and connection. Every gentle touch from Axel, every warm word, built an invisible bridge over the chasm of my past, inviting me to step toward a future where I might once again believe in love and tenderness. In that fragile cocoon of newfound solace, I allowed myself to reflect on the strange, beautiful paradox of my existence. A life scarred by brutality, yet now illuminated by the soft, healing glow of a compassionate touch. I was learning, perhaps for the first time, that healing might be possible even in the midst of overwhelming pain. The tender intimacy that unfolded between us was not a promise of instant redemption, but a spark. A tentative glimmer of hope that dared to challenge the suffocating legacy of my past. In the quiet, guarded space between our shared breaths, the mystery of Axel's intentions mingled with my own longing for a connection that could finally mend the broken pieces of my soul. It was a delicate moment of transformation, one that hinted at the possibility of change. A change that, if nurtured, might one day become a beacon strong enough to guide me out of the shadows. A hesitant melody of longing, fear, and hope began to echo in the quiet spaces between our shared moments. A complex dance that wove together the delicate threads of trust and the ever-present specter of past violence. In the soft glow of dusk, as shadows elongated and merged with the remnants of the day's pain, our intimate exchanges took on an almost ritualistic cadence. Every brush of his hand, every gentle whisper, stirred a tumult within me. A symphony of emotions that both comforted and reminded me of the brutal darkness I had once known. I found myself struggling to reconcile the warmth of Axel's touch with the cold, scarred memories that had so long defined my existence. When his fingertips traced the curve of my wrist, it was as if he were attempting to redraw the boundaries of my battered soul. Yet, with every caress came the ghost of a past where the same gentle pressure had been wielded as a weapon. Each touch a reminder of the pain that had once shattered me. I marveled at the contrast. The tender strokes that now promised solace were intertwined with the bitter taste of memories I could never fully escape. As we sat together in a fragile cocoon of fading light, I caught myself wondering why trust was such an elusive treasure when the past had been so unforgiving. Every word of kindness, every soft murmur of reassurance from him, wove a delicate tapestry of hope that clashed against the harsh, jagged fragments of old wounds. I want to believe, I thought, that your touch is meant to heal, not harm. Yet the inner voice, honed by years of cruelty, whispered in caution, urging me to hold back even as I yearned to surrender completely. This internal conflict, an ever-present tug-of-war between the desire for love and the instinct to self-preserve, created a bittersweet tension that was as palpable as the cool breeze drifting through the open window. In one fleeting moment, Axel leaned forward, his eyes soft with unspoken promise, and whispered, "I see the strength in you, even when you doubt it." His words resonated deeply, their sincerity slicing through the thick fog of my apprehensions. The sound of his voice, both gentle and earnest, stirred something fragile within me, a spark of hope that perhaps, despite everything, there was a way to forge a new path where trust could bloom. Yet, every tender moment was countered by the lingering taste of fear, a shadow that refused to be banished by warmth alone. I recalled memories of harsh reprimands, the sting of lashes, and the cold isolation that followed every act of defiance. These recollections, like ghosts, danced at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me that vulnerability was a double-edged sword. As we continued our quiet communion, the world outside seemed to fade into a distant murmur, leaving only the intimate cadence of our breathing and the soft rustle of fabric. Axel's hand moved slowly from my wrist to gently cup my cheek, and in that touch, I felt the weight of both a promise and a warning. It was as if his caress carried the beauty of a tender spring morning, yet also the memory of a long, harsh winter. Each subtle shift in his gesture spoke volumes. Here was a man who sought to comfort, yet could not entirely erase the echoes of past violence that clung to him as surely as they clung to me. I began to wonder if this emerging bond, fragile and tentative as it was, could ever break the cycle of abuse that had defined my life. Could the gentle rhythm of his reassurances rewrite the narrative of my past? I asked myself, can trust truly be rebuilt on foundations scarred by years of betrayal and brutality? The question echoed in the silence between us, a haunting refrain that mingled with the soft murmur of the evening. There was an undeniable beauty in the contrast, an almost poetic duality where hope and dread coexisted, each amplifying the other. In that charged space, my inner dialogue took on a rhythmic cadence, a silent soliloquy of self-questioning and yearning. I reflected on the paradox of our connection. Every tender moment with Axel was a step toward healing, yet it also served as a stark reminder of everything I had lost. His gentle smile and the way his eyes crinkled with genuine care were like rays of light piercing through the dense canopy of my past. And yet, for every moment of comfort, I could not entirely shake the lingering specter of mistrust. It was as if the promise of romance was intertwined with a reminder that the scars of the past could never be completely erased. As twilight deepened and the shadows of night began to merge with the remnants of day, the complexity of our dance became ever more apparent. I felt the subtle pull of a bond that could potentially lead me out of the darkness, a bond that might, in time, prove strong enough to defy the oppressive forces that had long held me captive. But for now, the dance continued, a delicate interplay of longing, fear, and the tentative glimmer of trust. Every whispered word and every soft caress was both an invitation to surrender and a reminder to remain cautious. In that suspended moment, as the world held its breath, I knew that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Yet, amid the interplay of tenderness and lingering dread, there was a stirring, a hint of a future where love might triumph over the shadows. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to make me believe that perhaps, together, we could begin to mend what had once been so brutally broken. Suddenly, as the soft cadence of our tender moment began to settle into a fragile rhythm, the door burst open with a force that shattered our isolation. A cacophony of urgent voices and aggressive footsteps flooded the room, the unexpected intrusion ripping through the delicate intimacy that had so recently begun to blossom. My heart pounded, as a mixture of fear and defiance surged within me, every muscle tensing in anticipation of the inevitable conflict. "Get back here!" barked a voice I didn't recognize, a harsh, commanding tone that carried the unmistakable authority of a pack member. Axel's reassuring grip on my wrist tightened momentarily as he shifted his stance, his eyes narrowing at the sudden intrusion. The room, which had just moments ago cradled a burgeoning sense of hope, now became the arena for a raw, unyielding struggle for control. In the doorway, several figures loomed, their presence radiating an unpredictable tension that was both electric and ominous. One of them, a towering figure with an air of arrogance, stepped forward and sneered, "You think you can just forget your place and get cozy with outsiders?" His words sliced through the space like cold steel. Their collective voices rose, overlapping in a discordant medley of accusations and demands. It was as if the very fabric of our fragile sanctuary was unraveling before my eyes. Inside, a tumult of emotions churned within me. Part of me wanted to submit to the chaos, to retreat back into the familiar numbness of abuse and control. But another part, a small yet persistent spark, urged me to stand my ground. I struggled internally, caught between the instinct to protect, what little semblance of safety I had found, and the ingrained need to remain compliant in the face of overwhelming authority. The dichotomy was jarring, a visceral internal battle pitting submission against self-preservation, fear against a yearning for autonomy. Axel stepped in, his voice steady and cutting through the rising din. "We are not here to cause trouble," he stated, his tone both assertive and conciliatory. But the tension in the room was palpable, and his words seemed only to intensify the scrutiny that now fell upon us. I felt the air thicken as more voices chimed in, a mixture of disapproval, curiosity, and barely concealed hostility that underscored the unpredictable dynamics of our pack. Amid the verbal onslaught, I could feel my pulse racing, every nerve ending alert to the shifting balance of power. The physical tension was almost unbearable. The space between us shrank as bodies jostled and stood rigidly, each pack member determined to stake their claim. The crisp, modern language of their commands and demands reverberated sharply in my ears, as if each word were designed to remind me of my inferiority, my supposed place within this rigid hierarchy. One voice, softer but no less insistent, questioned, "How do you expect to challenge our order when you barely know who you are?" The comment stung, cutting into the fragile hope that had only just begun to emerge from the depths of my battered spirit. I could almost hear the echo of every harsh lesson from my past, every moment when I had been forced into submission, each memory a reminder that defiance often came at a steep price. As the conflict escalated, a surge of physical movement disrupted the scene. A sudden shove sent a nearby pack member stumbling into me, the collision jolting me back to a stark awareness of my vulnerability. My instinct to protect myself flared, and my body tensed as if preparing for an inevitable blow. In that split second, I experienced the raw fear of being caught between the relentless force of the pack's brutality and my desperate need to maintain some measure of control over my own destiny. My inner dialogue raced, a desperate monologue that oscillated between resignation and rebellion. Am I just a pawn here? I thought. Do I really have the power to break free from these chains? Or will I forever be trapped in this cycle of domination? The questions were sharp and relentless, a mirror reflecting the painful legacy of past abuses that had taught me to fear my own strength. Yet amid the tumult, a quiet voice within reminded me that even in the darkest moments, a spark of defiance remained. Axel's eyes met mine for a fleeting instant, and I sensed in his gaze a shared determination, a silent acknowledgement that this struggle was far from over, that the conflict was not merely an intrusion on our space, but a pivotal moment that could redefine the boundaries of our existence. His presence, steadfast amid the chaos, was a beacon, urging me to consider that perhaps I was more than the sum of my scars. The clash of voices and the physical jostling of bodies painted a vivid picture of the pack's unpredictable nature. Here, in this charged moment, power was a shifting, elusive concept, a constant battle between the desire to assert control and the desperate need to belong. Every word, every shove, was a reminder of how deeply ingrained the pack's hierarchy was and how difficult it was to carve out a space for genuine connection in such a hostile environment. And yet, even as the tension reached its peak, an unresolved undercurrent of hope shimmered quietly beneath the surface. A promise that this struggle, harsh and unyielding as it was, might someday lead to a reconfiguration of power, a transformation, where the bonds of the past could be reforged into something resilient and true. In that moment of unyielding conflict, I felt the storm of voices and physical tensions coalesce into a single, overwhelming truth. My journey was far from over. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the struggle for control, both over my own fate and within the tumultuous dynamics of our pack, would demand every ounce of strength I possessed. And so, with every conflicted heartbeat, I braced myself for what was to come, determined to find a way to reclaim my voice in a world that sought to silence it at every turn. Late that evening, when the chaos of conflict had finally receded into a distant murmur, I found myself alone before a time-worn mirror. Its surface, cracked and weathered by years of neglect, reflected back not only the physical scars that marred my body, but also the deeper, more hidden wounds etched into my soul. In that quiet, solitary moment, I stood transfixed, as if the mirror were a portal into the recesses of my own self-worth, a canvas of damage that, despite its harshness, held the potential for renewal. I traced the jagged lines of a faded scar that ran across my cheek, a silent testament to the violence of my past. Each mark was a memory, a reminder of a time when I was rendered vulnerable and broken by those who sought to control me. Yet, as I gazed into the mirror, a subtle transformation began to unfold within me. The sharp sting of self-criticism, so long a constant companion, gradually softened into a quieter, more contemplative dialogue. "You are more than these scars," I whispered to my reflection, though the voice trembled with uncertainty. "There is beauty in resilience, strength in every wound." The mirror, with its aged imperfections, became both a harsh critic and a compassionate mentor. It reflected not only my physical deterioration, but also the flicker of hope that had slowly kindled inside me. I noticed the faint lines around my eyes, the silent echoes of countless nights spent in despair, but also saw a spark there, a quiet light that refused to be extinguished by cruelty. In that moment, I realized that the very evidence of my suffering could be the catalyst for transformation. The scars were not solely reminders of defeat. They were also symbols of survival, of battles fought and endured against insurmountable odds. I allowed my gaze to wander over my form, each imperfection telling its own story. My arms, once tender and unblemished, now bore the marks of endless struggle, while my hands trembled ever so slightly, as if still haunted by memories of relentless abuse. A part of me ached at the sight, burdened by the weight of a past that seemed unchangeable. And yet, beneath that ache lay a growing awareness, an emerging realization that my value was not defined by the cruelty I had suffered, but by the quiet strength I had cultivated in its aftermath. In the dim light, I could almost see the outlines of the person I once was, a child who dreamed of hope, whose laughter had once filled the quiet corners of my heart. That vision, though distorted by the harsh experiences of my youth, stirred a bittersweet longing within me. I wondered if it was possible to reclaim even a fragment of that lost innocence, to transform the scars into something beautiful, a map of survival rather than a record of defeat. The thought was both terrifying and liberating, a delicate balance of sorrow and the promise of renewal. My inner dialogue wove through the silence like a gentle incantation, questioning the worth that I had so often been denied. Why must I bear these marks? I pondered, my mind drifting between the memories of past torments and the tentative hope of healing. Yet, as the hours slipped by, a quiet certainty began to emerge amidst the self-doubt. The mirror, in its unyielding honesty, revealed not only the visible damage but also the resilient spirit that lay beneath. Each scar, each line, was proof that I had endured, proof that I was still here, still fighting, still capable of change. I reached out, tentatively touching the cool glass, and for a moment it felt as though I was caressing the very essence of my being. The texture was rough, a reminder of the battles fought, but it also felt strangely comforting, a tangible connection to the reality of my survival. "I am not defined by my pain," I murmured softly, the words a fragile vow that resonated deep within. In that reflection, I began to see a glimmer of beauty amid the shattered remnants of my past. The scars, once symbols of my brokenness, were now markers of my strength, badges that spoke of a life lived through adversity and emerged, however slowly, into a space where healing was possible. In that long introspective moment, the mirror did more than reflect my physical self. It illuminated the hidden reservoir of resilience that I had nearly forgotten. The internal storm of self-criticism and despair began to settle into a quiet acceptance. I recognized that the road to healing would be arduous and uncertain, but for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that I was worthy of transformation. The juxtaposition of past brutality and present vulnerability created a poignant tapestry, a story of pain interwoven with the tender promise of renewal. Standing there, in the silence of that dim room, I felt a stirring of hope, a delicate, unspoken promise that one day, these scars would not just be reminders of what I had endured, but symbols of the profound journey toward reclaiming my self-worth. And in that moment, as I gazed into the mirror of my own truth, I vowed to nurture that spark of resilience, to let it guide me toward a future where the beauty of my soul could finally shine through the darkness. In the quiet solitude of an unremarkable bathroom, I finally found a moment to care for myself, a moment that felt both alien and deeply necessary. The room was bathed in soft, ambient light, a gentle contrast to the harshness of the world outside and the violence that had long scarred my body and soul. I stepped into a warm bath, the water enveloping me in its comforting embrace like a silken blanket, and for a brief, blissful instant, the relentless echoes of my past seemed to recede. As I sank deeper into the fragrant water, the subtle scent of lavender mingled with the fresh, clean aroma of the soap. A delicate reminder that even in the midst of lingering trauma, there existed the promise of renewal. The warmth seeped into my aching muscles, soothing the physical pain that had become an all-too-familiar companion. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to be fully present in that tender, transformative moment, letting the water wash over the scars that marked my skin as badges of a tumultuous history. Gently, I reached for a soft brush and began to caress my hair. The bristles glided over my scalp with a soothing rhythm, a gentle reminder that I was worthy of care and tenderness. With every stroke, I could feel the weight of my past slowly lifting, replaced by a cautious hope, a fragile promise that perhaps I could reclaim a sense of normalcy. My fingers, once numb from years of abuse, now danced across the strands of my hair, massaging away the tension that had long gripped me. In the reflective surface of a small mirror above the sink, I caught a glimpse of my own eyes. Those same eyes that had witnessed unthinkable cruelty, yet now shimmered with a timid glimmer of possibility. I whispered softly to myself, "You deserve to feel warmth. You deserve to be nurtured." The words, tentative and raw, echoed in the quiet room, mingling with the gentle hum of the water. It was as if the very act of self-care was a quiet rebellion, a declaration that I would not let the scars of my past define the entirety of my future. Every sensation in that moment was heightened. The caress of the water, the soft brush against my skin, even the subtle sound of my own breathing seemed imbued with a new meaning. I focused on the tactile beauty of the present, the smooth glide of the soap lather as it slipped through my fingers, the soft warmth of the towel as I wrapped it around myself, and the gentle murmur of the faucet that marked time in a rhythm of its own. Here, in this intimate sanctuary, the memories of violence and despair were gradually replaced by the soothing cadence of self-renewal. As I continued to care for myself, my inner dialogue grew more confident. I reflected on how far I had come, not in a grand, triumphant leap, but through countless small acts of defiance against a life of abuse. Each gentle moment of self-care was a step toward reclaiming the parts of me that had been hidden away for so long. I am more than the pain I've endured, I reminded myself, feeling the stirring of a long-dormant strength. Every touch, every moment of kindness I grant myself is a victory over the past. Yet, even as a quiet hope began to blossom within me, I was not naive about the challenges ahead. The scars on my body were a permanent reminder of the cruelty I had suffered, and the road to true healing would undoubtedly be long and fraught with setbacks. But in that moment, as I stood there with damp skin and a tender heart, I allowed myself to believe that these small moments of care could be the seeds of a larger, transformative change. I could almost see, in the soft haze of the steam and light, a future where I was not defined solely by my past, but reborn into a life of dignity and gentle strength. There was a delicate interplay between vulnerability and empowerment, each breath in the warm bath a silent promise of renewal. I closed my eyes and imagined that each droplet of water was cleansing not just my body, but my very spirit. A slow, healing process that would eventually reveal a version of myself unburdened by constant pain. It was a vision both haunting and beautiful, a future where I could look in the mirror and see a person who had survived, who had grown, and who was finally ready to embrace life with all its uncertainties. In that delicate process of healing and renewal, I understood that the journey ahead was not defined by instantaneous transformation, but by these fragile, persistent moments of care. They were the quiet acts of self-love that, over time, could accumulate into a powerful force for change, a force that might one day shatter the chains of my past and illuminate a path toward a brighter, more compassionate future. And as I emerged from that bath, still trembling but undeniably renewed, I carried with me the quiet conviction that healing, though arduous, was not only possible, it was already beginning. As I stepped out of the sanctuary of my self-care, the world around me revealed layers of complexity that had long remained hidden. The pack was stirring, and with it came new faces whose presence brought both promise and uncertainty. In the warm glow of late afternoon, I found myself drawn into a delicate web of interactions that would redefine the contours of my solitary journey. Gabby emerged first, a vivacious spirit whose laughter cut through the lingering heaviness of my past. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she teased, "Hey there, Luna. Finally decided to grace us with your presence?" Her tone was playful, yet laced with an unspoken understanding of the pain I carried. I could sense that beneath her teasing lay a genuine empathy, a subtle invitation to trust her despite the chaos that had long defined our pack's dynamics. Not long after, Whitney arrived, her presence exuding a calm strength. With a gentle smile and a soft, modern cadence, she remarked, "It's good to see you, Luna. Sometimes the darkness just needs a little light." Her words resonated deeply within me, stirring a hopeful chord. Whitney's kindness was measured, an anchor in a world where alliances shifted like sand. I noted how her eyes held a quiet determination, as if she balanced the weight of her own burdens while offering solace to others. Amid the group, other members shuffled into view, each adding a new note to this evolving symphony of relationships. There was a certain magnetic tension in the air, a mix of playful banter and the subtle undercurrents of ambition. Crisp, modern dialogue punctuated our exchanges. One member, whose voice carried both charm and caution, casually remarked, "We're all pieces of a bigger puzzle here. Every one of us has a story, some darker, some brighter, but they all add up." His words, light yet profound, left me contemplating the vast network of experiences that intertwined our fates. As the conversation unfolded, I felt an intricate dance of connection taking shape, a delicate interplay where trust and mystery coexisted. Gabby, ever the instigator, playfully nudged Whitney and me, laughing. "You two seem to have that spark, the kind that promises mischief and maybe a little redemption." Her banter, though light-hearted, hinted at deeper alliances forming within our fragmented pack. In the midst of the playful exchanges, I couldn't help but notice subtle shifts in group dynamics. There was an unspoken hierarchy at work, where each new encounter not only added to the complexity of our collective, but also revealed potential paths toward healing and unity. I listened intently as voices intertwined in crisp, modern dialogue, a mix of hopeful declarations and cautious warnings. Whitney remarked, "We've seen so many broken souls wander these paths. Sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that lead to real change." Her observation resonated with my inner reflections, echoing my own silent vow to break free from the chains of past abuse. The gentle cadence of her speech, paired with the confident glint in her eyes, lent an air of possibility to our gathering. Yet, even amid these moments of shared warmth and camaraderie, I could not entirely shake the lingering shadows of mistrust. My inner monologue, ever cautious, reminded me that every smile might hide a secret. Every friendly word might come with an ulterior motive. I wondered, with a mix of longing and skepticism, can these new connections truly mend the broken pieces of my soul, or will they too be tainted by the cycles of domination and betrayal? The question hung in the air, mingling with the soft laughter and teasing remarks of my newfound companions. As we moved from one conversation to another, I began to observe the subtle interplay of ambition and genuine care. There were moments when a knowing look or a gentle touch conveyed more than any spoken word, a shared understanding among us that we were all, in our own way, seeking redemption. Amid the banter, I caught fleeting glances of empathy from faces that had known their own hardships, and those moments of silent solidarity began to stir something deep within me. The ambiguous intentions of each pack member, their layered pasts and uncertain futures, created an atmosphere thick with mystery. Every interaction was a puzzle piece, hinting at alliances that might one day transform into something more profound than mere survival. In that space of vibrant yet cautious connection, I sensed the seeds of a broader narrative taking root, one where the weight of our collective pain could be borne together, and where the potential for healing lay hidden beneath layers of playful banter and veiled glances. Each new encounter added depth to my inner evolution, inviting me to consider that perhaps trust could be rebuilt one tentative moment at a time. And so, amidst the gentle hum of conversation and the soft interplay of laughter and lingering doubt, I found myself stepping into a realm where the promise of redemption and the intrigue of connection offered a fragile yet powerful glimpse of a future where I might finally begin to mend. The pack, with all its ambiguous loyalties and unpredictable dynamics, had become not just a backdrop for my pain, but a complex tapestry of relationships that held the potential for both cruelty and, if nurtured with care, genuine healing. In us, the quiet aftermath of our shared moments of tenderness, a more sinister undercurrent began to emerge, a murmur of power struggles and whispered ambitions that defined the very fabric of our pack. It was as if the soft bonds we had just begun to form were interwoven with the intricate, unyielding threads of leadership, loyalty, and betrayal. In hushed corners and between strained smiles, I could sense the weight of unspoken politics pressing, in a psychological warfare that was as brutal as any physical blow. Late one evening, while the embers of our earlier gathering still glowed faintly, I found myself drawn into a circle of voices whose words were laced with both camaraderie and a veiled challenge. Axel, whose compassion had offered a respite from the past's violence, now assumed a more measured tone. His eyes, steady and calculating, swept across the group as he said, "In our world, power is not given. It is earned, and every decision we make comes with a price." His words resonated in the silence that followed, leaving me to ponder the true nature of leadership in this fractured society. Gabby, ever playful yet undeniably sharp, interjected with a wry smile. "And sometimes loyalty is nothing but a mask for survival. We do what we must, even if it means betraying those we once held dear." Her remark, delivered with a teasing lilt, carried a weight that belied its light tone. I could see the flicker of conflict in the eyes of those around us, a silent acknowledgement that beneath our fragile alliances, rivalries festered like hidden wounds waiting to be exploited. Amid the gentle banter, I listened to my own inner voice, questioning the true cost of belonging in a system where every bond was tainted by ulterior motives. I wondered, who truly holds the power here? And what sacrifices are we willing to make to survive in a world where betrayal lurks behind every kind word? The question echoed in my mind, merging with the layered dialogue around me, and I felt a growing sense of unease. The political, chessboard of our pack was a constant reminder that trust was fragile, easily shattered by the cold calculus of ambition. As the conversation continued, a quieter, more introspective tone took over. Whitney, always a voice of reason, spoke softly. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in domination, but in the willingness to understand our vulnerabilities. Yet, vulnerability is a luxury many cannot afford. Her words were a gentle admonition, a reminder that while compassion could be a bridge to healing, it was also a weakness that could be exploited. I felt the tension build within me as I considered the paradox. To be loved and protected, one had to expose one's deepest fears, but in a pack governed by ruthless pragmatism, such exposure could lead to ruin. In the midst of these reflective exchanges, I caught snippets of private conversations, furtive glances exchanged, a hand resting a moment too long on another's shoulder, and I realized that every alliance, every promise of redemption, was intertwined with the specter of sacrifice. The quiet murmur of a voice I barely heard said, "In order to ascend, you must sometimes descend into the depths of betrayal." It was a haunting refrain that underscored the cost of ambition in a world where every gesture of trust might conceal a dagger. The night deepened, and the conversation gradually drifted toward the unresolved conflicts that lay at the heart of our existence. Axel's voice, now laced with a subtle intensity, posed a question that cut to the core of our shared dilemma. What are we willing to lose to claim power? Is the price of survival measured only in loyalty, or in the sacrifices of our very selves? His question hung in the air like a delicate but potent spell, compelling each of us to confront the sacrifices that had shaped our lives. I felt a shiver run through me, not from the cold, but from the realization that within this intricate web of pack politics, the line between protector and oppressor was perilously thin. In that moment, as I absorbed the weight of their words and the gravity of our situation, I understood that our pack was more than a group of survivors. It was a living, breathing entity, driven by ambition, fraught with internal conflicts that threatened to tear us apart. The psychological warfare at play was as relentless as the physical brutality I had endured. It was a battle for hearts and minds, where every smile, every touch, and every whispered promise carried the potential for both healing and harm. My thoughts, swirling with the complexity of these revelations, clung to a fragile hope. Perhaps, amidst the turbulent interplay of power and betrayal, there was a chance for a new order, a place where compassion could temper ambition and genuine loyalty might emerge from the ashes of past transgressions. But for now, the question remained unanswered, leaving me suspended between the desire to trust and the instinct to protect myself from the inevitable storm. In the midst of the chaos that defined our existence, a gentle interlude unfolded. A moment when the world around us seemed to pause, allowing a tender intimacy to blossom between us. Axel and I found ourselves secluded in a quiet alcove, far from the clamor of disputes and power struggles that had so often governed our days. The space was modest, yet suffused with a soft, amber light that filtered through the slats of a weathered window, casting long, gentle shadows that danced like memories of a lost, simpler time. Axel's eyes, usually guarded with an unspoken resolve, softened as he knelt beside me. In that moment, his touch was not that of a leader or a rescuer, but of a kindred spirit, reaching out to soothe the storms within me. His hand, warm and reassuring, rested lightly on my shoulder, a silent promise that, for now, I was safe. I could feel the subtle pressure of his fingers, as if each one was mapping out the uncharted territories of my pain and slowly beginning to erase its harsh edges with gentle care. "Just breathe," he murmured, his voice both modern in its clarity and timeless in its compassion. The sound of his words was like a lullaby, coaxing the frantic beating of my heart into a steadier rhythm. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of his presence envelop me as I focused on each slow, deliberate breath. In that fragile pause, the chaos of our pack, the cruelty of our past, and the relentless power struggles all faded into a distant murmur. As I opened my eyes again, I caught a glimpse of Axel's face, a blend of strength and vulnerability that made me wonder about the hidden depths of his character. There was an unspoken question in his steady gaze, a silent inquiry into whether I could, perhaps, let go of the mistrust that had long chained my heart. I could almost see the echoes of his own battles reflected in the corners of his eyes. The battles fought not just on the external front, but deep within the recesses of his soul. We sat together for what felt like an eternity, sharing stories without words. The soft rustle of our clothing and the occasional quiet sigh punctuated the silence. I allowed myself to lean into his warmth, even as the remnants of past betrayals whispered caution in the back of my mind. Every touch, every fleeting caress, carried both the weight of previous hurts and the tender promise of healing. Axel's hand, as it moved slowly from my shoulder to the back of my hand, was as deliberate as it was gentle, urging me to trust. Not fully, perhaps, but enough to believe that this moment could be a beginning rather than another fleeting respite. The sensory details of that encounter were etched into my memory with a clarity that belied the surrounding turmoil. I remembered the faint scent of sandalwood mingled with the cool, crisp air of early evening, the sound of distant birds calling as if heralding the promise of a new day. The textures were equally vivid. The soft, worn fabric of the chair beneath us, the gentle press of Axel's skin against mine, and the subtle warmth that radiated from his touch, like a quiet defiance against the cold indifference of the world. Yet, even as genuine warmth and vulnerability filled the space between us, an undercurrent of caution lingered. My mind, ever haunted by past betrayals, kept a silent tally of every tender gesture, questioning if each was a step toward true intimacy or merely another fleeting comfort before the inevitable return of chaos. Can I really let my guard down? I wondered, feeling a twinge of both hope and hesitation. Axel seemed to sense my inner turmoil, his eyes conveying an unspoken reassurance that he, too, carried the scars of a turbulent past. With a soft smile, he reached up and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from my face, his fingers lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "It's okay," he whispered, as if the simple act was enough to bridge the gap between my fractured past and the promise of a gentler future. That small, quiet gesture, so filled with genuine care, resonated deeply within me. It was a subtle promise that, in the midst of an unpredictable and often brutal world, there could be moments of peace, moments where vulnerability was not a weakness, but a doorway to transformation. In that brief interlude of tender intimacy, the layers of fear, mistrust, and longing coalesced into something unexpectedly beautiful. The chaos outside might have continued its relentless march, but here, for these few precious minutes, I allowed myself to believe that healing was possible. The intricate dance of trust and fear was still unfolding, but the gentle cadence of Axel's touch had begun to rewrite the narrative of my wounded heart. And as we sat there, intertwined in this delicate moment, the promise of a deeper connection beckoned. A promise that, perhaps together, we could forge a new path out of the darkness, one tender, fragile step at a time. In the hushed twilight of our shared refuge, a series of murmurs began to ripple through the group, a soft undercurrent of secrets long hidden and alliances in constant flux. As Axel and I exchanged a knowing glance, the air thickened with tension. It was as if the very walls around us held whispered confessions of betrayals and ambitions, secrets that had festered in silence until now. "Did you ever wonder why our leaders act the way they do?" Whitney asked quietly, her voice barely rising above the soft rustling of fabric and the low hum of distant conversation. Her question, innocent yet loaded, sent a shiver down my spine. I sensed that behind her calm exterior lay a curiosity as deep as my own, a yearning to understand the forces that had governed our lives for so long. Axel's gaze grew distant as he considered her words. "There are truths in this pack that even we have yet to fully grasp," he replied, his tone measured and reflective. His eyes flickered briefly with an emotion I could not quite name. Was it regret? Or perhaps the weight of responsibility for secrets too heavy to bear? In that moment, the facade of unity among us began to crumble, revealing an intricate web of shifting loyalties and hidden agendas. My own thoughts churned relentlessly. I recalled whispered conversations in shadowed corridors and half-heard arguments that hinted at power struggles far more complex than I had ever imagined. I used to believe that pain was our only inheritance. I mused silently. But now, I see that there are deeper scars etched by deceit and the ruthless ambitions of those we once trusted, the memories of my past, of betrayals that had left me feeling abandoned and unworthy, mingled with these new revelations, painting a picture of a world where loyalty was as volatile as it was precious. Gabby, ever the provocateur, leaned forward with a wry smile. "Secrets have a way of coming out," she said, her voice laced with both mischief and sorrow. "Sometimes I wonder if the ones who claim to protect us are the very ones plotting against us." Her words, though delivered with a playful lilt, carried a gravity that made me question everything I thought I knew about our pack. Every casual remark, every knowing look exchanged between the elders, hinted at hidden layers of power dynamics that I had only begun to glimpse. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, and I sensed that even those who appeared united were, in truth, divided by unspoken resentments and personal ambitions. As I listened to the dialogue around me, my inner monologue became a silent litany of questions. Who truly holds the reins of power in our pack? What sacrifices have been made, and what betrayals have been concealed behind promises of loyalty? The uncertainty gnawed at me, yet it also ignited a spark of determination. If I could unravel these mysteries, perhaps I could find a way to reclaim some measure of control over my own destiny. Axel's voice broke through my thoughts again. "There was a time when I believed that strength meant silence, that we had to endure without question," he confessed, his tone imbued with a sadness that resonated deep within me. "But the more I've seen, the more I realize that power can be a burden as much as a blessing. Sometimes the most courageous act is to reveal the truth, even if it means shattering the illusions we've built around us." His admission hung in the air, a poignant reminder that the path to true change was paved with vulnerability and risk. I could feel the shifting loyalties around me like a tangible current, a delicate balance between the promise of redemption and the threat of betrayal. My heart pounded with both fear and anticipation, each beat echoing the uncertainty of our collective future. As one pack member quietly remarked, "Every secret unveiled is a step toward freedom, or a descent into chaos." The duality of his words encapsulated our predicament. Unveiling hidden truths might be the key to breaking our cycle of suffering, yet it also risked igniting a conflagration that could consume us all. In that charged moment, I realized that the revelations unfolding before me were not merely about our pack's hierarchy or the betrayals of the past. They were about the possibility of transformation. The secrets we guarded so jealously, the shifting alliances that had long defined our existence, might hold the promise of a new order, one where compassion and truth could eventually triumph over fear and deceit. However, the road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and every revelation was a double-edged sword, capable of both liberating and destroying. As the night deepened and our conversation lulled into reflective silence, I felt an inescapable pull, a desire to understand, to challenge the established order, and to find a place where loyalty was more than a tool for survival. The intricate web of pack politics was as confounding as it was mesmerizing, and within its tangled threads lay the seeds of our potential redemption or our ultimate downfall. With every whispered secret and every tentative confession, the mystery of our world grew, beckoning us to question who we were, who we could become, and what sacrifices were truly necessary for survival. In the quiet aftermath of revelations, and shifting alliances, I found myself caught in an emotional maelstrom, a delicate, unyielding struggle between the raw intensity of love and the haunting echoes of my past. Every time I closed my eyes, Axel's gentle presence flooded my thoughts, his touch and warm, steady gaze igniting a yearning for a love that promised to heal even the deepest scars. And yet, those same memories of unrelenting abuse and betrayal crept in like shadows, casting doubt on the possibility of unconditional love. I sat alone in a dim corner of our shared refuge, the soft glow of twilight filtering in through the narrow window. In that quiet space, my mind became both a sanctuary and a battlefield. I replayed the moments of tenderness I had shared with Axel, the softness of his hand against my cheek, the whispered assurances that made my heart flutter, and the gentle warmth of his embrace that seemed for a fleeting instant to mend what had long been broken. Each memory stirred in me a profound longing, a desperate hope that perhaps love, at its purest, could erase the remnants of my tortured past. Yet, as the glow of those cherished moments mingled with the darkness of recollection, a storm of uncertainty roiled within me. "How can I trust you, Axel?" I silently pleaded to the quiet around me, my thoughts trembling with vulnerability. "How can I accept your love when every beat of my heart is haunted by the scars of abuse?" The questions, heavy with the weight of past anguish, cut through the fragile calm like shards of glass. Memories of harsh voices, painful strikes, and cold, isolating nights surged unbidden, threatening to drown the budding warmth that his presence had ignited. I recalled the vivid details of my former life, the relentless cycle of domination and despair that had stripped me of both body and soul. In the recesses of my mind, I could still hear the echoes of a world where trust was a luxury I could ill afford, and love was often a weapon wielded by those who sought control. And now, as Axel's love began to break through the barriers I had built, I felt a profound internal conflict. Part of me craved the security and redemption that his care offered, while another part recoiled in fear, whispering that such tenderness might be another prelude to deeper pain. In that reflective solitude, I weighed the fragile scales of trust and fear. Axel's every soft gesture was a gentle reminder of a possibility I had long thought lost, a chance to experience intimacy untainted by cruelty. His eyes, when they met mine, spoke of a profound understanding, as if he had witnessed the depths of my despair and yet chose to believe in the promise of renewal. But the bitter taste of past betrayals was not easily dispelled. It lingered at the edges of my thoughts, a constant, insidious reminder that love, no matter how tender, could sometimes serve as a mask for ulterior motives. I let my mind wander to the idea of unconditional love, a love that could embrace all of me, scars and shadows alike. Was it possible that Axel's care could become a sanctuary, a safe haven where the ghosts of my past were gently laid to rest? I yearned for that possibility, yet I also recognized the inherent risk. To allow someone to touch the very core of my being was to expose myself to the possibility of further hurt, a risk I had once been forced to take, and one I still hesitated to embrace fully. The interplay of light and darkness in my inner world became almost poetic, a tapestry woven from the silken threads of hope and the jagged remnants of past sorrows. In this internal dialogue, I questioned, can love truly heal the wounds that run so deep? Or will the scars remain as constant, unyielding markers of my suffering? The uncertainty of the answer was as potent as the emotions themselves, and with every heartbeat, I felt the stakes of my decisions rise. Axel's presence, though reassuring, could not entirely erase the lingering doubts. Yet, in that delicate moment, I recognized that every step toward vulnerability was also a step toward reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried under layers of pain. The intensity of my feelings for him was matched only by the shadow of my past, creating a tension that was as excruciating as it was exhilarating. It was a dilemma with no easy answers, one that forced me to confront the question of whether true love could serve as a transformative force, or if it would merely become another arena for betrayal. As the night deepened, and the flickering light of the lone lamp danced upon my weary face, I made a silent vow. I would not allow the ghosts of my past to dictate the course of my future. With each tentative breath, I chose to lean into the warmth that Axel offered, even as I wrestled with the memory of every harsh touch and every cold word. In that moment, I understood that the journey toward healing was fraught with risk, yet it was a risk worth taking, if it meant opening my heart to the possibility of a love that might one day mend the deepest wounds. The air grew thick with tension as the night erupted into chaos. A sudden clamor, a violent collision of angry shouts and harsh footsteps, shattered the fragile calm that had settled over us. In an instant, external forces, long simmering beneath the surface of our pack's dark dynamics, burst forth like a tidal wave. I felt my heart pound against my ribcage as the force of the confrontation pushed me to the edge of my endurance, my body trembling with both fear and a desperate need to survive. It began with a barrage of angry voices accusing me of weakness, of being unworthy of the sanctuary we had so precariously built. I could see the harsh outlines of pack members converging, their faces a mixture of betrayal and resolve. In that chaotic moment, the weight of their scrutiny and the raw energy of their aggression threatened to break me. Every word, every shove, made it painfully clear that the fragile haven I had begun to trust was crumbling under the pressure of an unpredictable, brutal hierarchy. Amid the tumult, Axel emerged like a steadfast beacon, his eyes, burning with determination, locked onto mine. And in that charged gaze I saw a promise, a vow that I would not be abandoned to the storm. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, his voice slicing through the chaos. "Enough!" he roared, a command so fierce that even the enraged shouts faltered for a moment. His arms, strong and resolute, moved to shield me as others closed in, their faces contorted with both anger and something darker. In that heart-stopping instant, I felt an urgent surge of protection emanate from Axel and the allies who rallied at his side. Their intervention was swift and decisive, bodies interposing between me and the onslaught, rough hands seizing those who threatened our fragile bond. I clutched onto Axel, my grip a mix of desperation and gratitude, as his voice softened into a calm, urgent murmur that seemed to cradle my shattered spirit. "I've got you," he whispered, a promise heavy with unspoken sacrifice and fierce protectiveness. This world around me blurred into a dizzying swirl of motion and emotion as my inner turmoil roared louder than the external conflict. I felt the raw edge of pain and betrayal converge within me, each heartbeat a reminder of every cruel lesson etched into my past. My thoughts raced. I could no longer be the silent victim of this endless cycle. I vowed, in a tremulous inner cry, that I would fight back against the darkness that had haunted me for so long. Even as the violent chaos threatened to overwhelm me, a flicker of defiant strength sparked within, a declaration that my survival was worth every sacrifice, that I deserved protection and the chance to heal. Axel's protective stance, his unwavering presence amid the storm, bolstered my resolve. I remembered his gentle words during moments of tenderness, the soft caresses that had momentarily dispelled my fear. Now, they returned to me with renewed urgency. "We will not let them break you," his eyes seemed to say as he and our allies formed an impenetrable circle around me. Their determined expressions conveyed more than simple solidarity. It was a collective promise that the brutality of our world would not claim us without a fierce fight. In the midst of the confrontation, every detail seemed amplified. The rough texture of the cold floor under my knees, the stinging heat of every impact, and the resounding echo of voices that mingled rage with a bittersweet hope for change. I could taste both fear and a strange emerging sweetness of defiance on my tongue, a mixture that was as terrifying as it was empowering. The raw physicality of the moment was matched by the inner battle waging within me, My mind, battered by memories of past abuses, now churned with the possibility that I might finally be worthy of protection, of love, and of the renewal I had long yearned for. As the violence slowly subsided, and the intruders were forced to retreat by the resolute stand of our protectors, I felt a strange calm descend over me. A lull in the storm that allowed the deep wounds to throb with pain, yet also with the promise of recovery. In that silence, I made a solemn internal vow. I would no longer let fear and the weight of past betrayals dictate my future. I would fight for my right to be safe, to be cared for, and to eventually rise above the cruelty that had defined my past. In that moment of breaking point, as Axel's steady presence anchored me and our allies formed a shield of unwavering loyalty, I understood that the path to healing might be paved with sacrifice and struggle. Yet, I also knew that this fierce protection, this resolute promise of safety, was the first step toward reclaiming my own power. The battle was far from over, but now, for the first time, I felt an unyielding spark of hope, a deep conviction that I could and would survive. In the quiet aftermath of the conflict, as the storm of voices and violence finally receded, a tentative calm settled over me. The night's turmoil had left its mark, yet within that lingering silence, I sensed the stirrings of a renewed strength, a fragile ember of hope waiting to be nurtured. I stepped away from the chaos and into a space that, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, allowed me to breathe without fear. Outside, the soft light of dawn filtered through dew-laden trees, casting a gentle glow that transformed the harsh memories of brutality into shadows easily brushed aside by the promise of a new day. In a secluded clearing, surrounded by nature's quiet majesty, I found solace. The crisp, cool air carried the scent of pine and fresh earth, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of past confinement. With each step I took along the winding path, I felt the weight of my former despair gradually lighten. Here, the world seemed to whisper a secret, that even the deepest wounds could begin to mend if given the space to breathe. Sitting on a fallen log, I allowed myself to be fully present, closing my eyes as I listened to the gentle rustle of leaves and the soothing murmur of a nearby brook. My inner voice, once dominated by echoes of pain and betrayal, began to speak, in softer tones, a dialogue filled with cautious optimism and the promise of emotional freedom. "You are stronger than you know," I murmured, almost to myself, as memories of endless nights and harsh reprimands slowly receded into the background. In this moment of introspection, I dared to believe that I could reclaim my self-worth and rebuild the pieces of my identity that had been scattered by years of abuse. The natural beauty around me worked like a gentle salve, the vibrant green of the grass, the delicate blossoms that peeked through the undergrowth, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of the earth beneath my feet all reminded me that renewal was not just possible, it was a fundamental law of life. Each element of nature echoed a quiet resilience, a transformation from decay to new growth, mirroring the inner journey that was unfolding within me. I felt deep in my bones that if nature could renew itself so effortlessly, then perhaps I, too, could begin to heal. Slowly I stood, the cool morning air brushing against my skin as if to wash away the remnants of my past. I took a deep breath, savoring the mingled scents of dew and wildflowers, and looked upward at the awakening sky. It was a brilliant canvas of soft blues and blushes of pink, a promise that even after the darkest nights, light could emerge. "I will rise," I vowed silently, feeling a surge of determination replace the long-held fear. In that moment, the internal dialogue shifted from one of despair to a quiet, resolute hope. I recognized that reclaiming my strength was not an overnight miracle, but a journey marked by small, deliberate acts of courage. I began to recall the comforting words Axel had offered during our moments of tender intimacy. words that spoke of protection, care, and the possibility of a brighter future. Those memories now served as a beacon, guiding me through this transitional phase. Every step I took felt like a rebellion against the darkness that had so long defined my existence, a courageous act of reclaiming ownership of my own narrative. I understood that the scars on my skin and the deeper marks etched upon my soul were not symbols of weakness, but proof of my survival, of every battle fought and every victory, however small, won against despair. As I continued along the path, my mind wandered to the future, a future that, though uncertain, promised liberation from the chains of my past. The gentle caress of the wind, the distant call of a songbird, and the soothing murmur of water combined to form a quiet symphony of renewal. I felt the stirring of hope mingled with a deep-seated desire for emotional freedom, an aspiration to find a place where I could finally be whole again, unburdened by the weight of old scars. In that transformative silence, I made a promise to myself. I vowed that every day, no matter how arduous, I would choose to nurture this burgeoning hope. I would honor my journey by embracing each moment of tenderness and self-care as a step toward reclaiming the dignity that had once been stripped away. Though the road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, I now carried with me the profound realization that healing was possible. With nature as my witness and the gentle pulse of life echoing in my heart, I began the slow, deliberate process of walking away from the shadows toward a horizon filled with promise. As dawn broke over the horizon, a quiet revolution stirred within the pack, a turning point that promised a tentative escape from the long shadow of abuse. In the soft light of morning, whispers of a new alliance began to weave through our ranks, subtle yet insistent. It was as if the harshness of our past had forced us all into a desperate search for redemption. And now, united by a shared longing for a safer future, we were beginning to negotiate the terms of our freedom. I found myself in a hushed, secluded meeting space, far from the prying eyes of those who had once thrived on domination and cruelty. Here, a small circle of us gathered, faces that had long carried the weight of their own stories, scars both seen and unseen. Among them, Axel's steady presence remained, a beacon of hope, while others like Whitney and Gabby contributed their cautious optimism. The atmosphere was charged with urgency, yet tempered by a gentle promise that together we might forge a path out of the darkness. Our survival depends on our unity, Whitney stated softly, her voice clear and resolute. If we combine our strengths and trust one another, we can redefine our place in this pack, create a future free of the past's chains. Her words resonated in the quiet room, stirring an inner dialogue that blended hope with a realistic awareness of the risks. I realized that the time for silent suffering was over. Now was the moment to negotiate for our collective well-being, even if it meant challenging entrenched hierarchies and hidden betrayals. Gabby leaned forward, her eyes alight with both determination and a trace of defiant humor. I know many of us have been battered by the old ways, she said. But what if there's a chance to rebuild something new, where loyalty isn't enforced by fear, but chosen out of genuine care? Her words, playful yet deeply sincere, sparked a flicker of possibility in my heart. I could feel the weight of old wounds beginning to lift, replaced by a cautious desire for transformation. In that circle, delicate negotiations began. We spoke, in hushed tones, of strategies and new roles, of a plan to create safe spaces where each member's voice could be heard without the oppressive threat of retaliation. The discussion was as much internal as it was spoken aloud. Every word was a quiet negotiation with our own long-held fears and doubts. I found myself reflecting deeply on trust, an elusive treasure in our fractured world. Can I truly believe in this new alliance? I wondered silently. Or will the ghosts of betrayal resurface to shatter our fragile unity? Yet, as each member shared their story of loss and longing, my doubts were met with mutual understanding, a collective acknowledgement that we were all bound by the same desire for a future untainted by past cruelty. Axel, ever the steady force, spoke with a gentle urgency that both reassured and stirred us to action. "We cannot change what has been, but we can decide what comes next," he declared, his tone both poetic and pragmatic. "Every moment we've endured has led us to this crossroads. Let us choose to rise together, to build a sanctuary of trust and care where each of us has a stake." His words fell like seeds into the fertile soil of our shared hopes, and as I listened, I felt a quiet resolve begin to solidify within me. The emerging plans were delicate yet ambitious, a blueprint for a new order where compassion could temper, power and genuine alliances might serve as the foundation for lasting change. We discussed ways to protect the vulnerable, to redistribute power, and even how to create a network of safe havens scattered throughout our territory. Each idea, spoken with a blend of urgency and optimism, underscored our collective determination to rewrite the rules that had long bound us. As the meeting drew to a close, I lingered in the soft afterglow of this newfound camaraderie. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty and the specter of betrayal. But in that quiet space, I felt something I hadn't in years. The promise of liberation. The inner voice that had once been filled with despair now hummed with a cautious hope. I understood that transformation would not be instantaneous. It was a journey, a series of small, deliberate acts of trust and mutual support that could gradually dismantle the old order. In that pivotal moment, as the sun ascended and cast its gentle light upon us, the intricate web of pack politics began to unravel in favor of something new. The secrets and betrayals of our past would always linger, but now they were being met with the resolute spirit of change. I looked around at the faces of my new allies, each marked by their own scars, yet illuminated by the promise of a safer, kinder future. And I knew that this was only the beginning. Together, we would challenge the old ways, redefine loyalty, and step boldly into a future where the promise of redemption was no longer a distant dream, but a reality we could shape, one careful, courageous step at a time. The night pulsed with a raw intensity as old forces gathered once more, their presence, dark and foreboding against the fragile light of our newly forged alliance. It was as if the very air trembled with anticipation, a prelude to a confrontation that would test every ounce of strength we had painstakingly reclaimed. In the dim glow of a stormy sky, our pack's oppressive past, embodied by those who had, once ruled through terror and cruelty, converged with the resolute determination of our newfound unity. I stood at the forefront, my body still bearing the scars of relentless abuse, yet my eyes now burned with a fierce, unyielding hope. Every breath I took was a quiet rebellion against the darkness that had long threatened to suffocate me. Around me, Axel, Whitney, Gabby, and others who had joined our cause formed a protective circle, their faces a mix of grim determination and compassion. In that charged moment, I could feel our collective pulse, a steady, rhythmic reminder that we were no longer broken fragments of a lost past, but warriors of our own destinies. A gruff, harsh voice cut through the night as one of the old guards stepped forward, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think you can defy the order? You're nothing but weak prey," he spat, his words laced with the venom of a past steeped in domination. His eyes, cold and unforgiving, searched mine for any sign of submission. I could almost see the years of abuse and fear reflected in his gaze, a mirror of the old world we had all suffered under. But tonight, I was different. Tonight, the fear that once chained me had been replaced by a burning resolve, a promise to myself that I would no longer be a victim. Axel's voice boomed across the clearing, firm yet resonant with an unspoken tenderness. "No one here will be broken again," he declared, his words slicing through the tension like a beacon of light. His presence was an anchor amid the rising storm, and in that moment, I felt the weight of every cruel memory dissolve into the fierce heat of determination. His hand, steady on my shoulder, reminded me that I was no longer alone. Our united strength was a force too potent to be ignored. Amid the clamor, my mind swirled with internal dialogue, a relentless chant of every harsh lesson I had learned, and every tender moment that had given birth to a spark of hope. I have endured every lash, every tear, and every moment of despair, I thought, each word punctuating my resolve. Now I stand here not as a victim, but as a survivor, ready to reclaim my life. The battle was not solely fought with fists and fury. It was waged in the recesses of the heart and mind, where fear, love, and determination merged into a single, unbreakable will. The confrontation escalated, voices rising and clashing in a dissonant chorus that vibrated through the night. The old abusive forces pressed in, their tactics crude and brutal, yet every attack was met with the unwavering defense of our alliance. In that moment, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the coppery tang of blood, a visceral reminder that the past was not easily erased. But with each thrust of anger, with each sneer of scorn, our resolve hardened like tempered steel. I could feel my own strength surging as the enemy's words ricocheted off the shield of our collective unity. The physical clash was accompanied by a silent symphony of inner voices, a litany of hope, defiance, and the deep, aching need to be free. "This is our time," Axel shouted over the chaos, his voice a rallying cry that reverberated through the clearing. "Every scar tells a story, and tonight we write a new chapter." His declaration ignited something fierce within me, as if the very air around us vibrated with the promise of transformation. In that climactic moment, as the battle reached its zenith, I felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, an emotional catharsis that washed over me in a torrent of pure, unfiltered feeling. The amalgam of fear and love, pain and determination surged in a single transformative beat. I screamed, not in anguish, but in triumphant release, a cry that acknowledged every dark memory while heralding the dawn of a new, self-determined future. Every heartbeat, every breath, pulsed with the promise that I would no longer be defined by my past. I was now the architect of my destiny. As the attackers gradually fell back, subdued by our united front, a heavy silence descended, charged with the raw energy of victory and the bittersweet echoes of what had been. The clearing, once a battleground of brutality, now held the tender glow of emotional liberation. I stood there, panting and trembling, yet filled with a newfound certainty. In that moment, I understood that the journey toward true freedom was not an end, but a continuous struggle. A struggle that, despite its challenges, was worth every sacrifice. I vowed silently to myself and to those who had fought by my side that I would never again let fear dictate my fate. With the night's final echoes still ringing in my ears, I realized that our collective battle had set the stage for a future where love, resilience, and truth would prevail over the cruel chains of the past. And as I looked into the determined faces around me, I knew that our alliance had been forged, not just in the fires of conflict, but in the unyielding promise of a life reclaimed. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the world around me transformed into a canvas of gentle hues and tender promise. In the soft, awakening glow of a new day, I stood on the threshold of a future once obscured by pain and despair, now illuminated by the steady light of hope and resilience. The tumultuous nights, the echoes of cruelty and betrayal, all those harrowing memories were slowly receding like distant shadows, giving way to the clear, fresh light of possibility. The quiet moments of this new dawn, I could feel the delicate emergence of healing coursing through me. Every step I took felt purposeful, a journey not only toward reclaiming my self-worth, but toward embracing the full spectrum of who I was meant to be. The scars that once mapped a history of abuse had become subtle reminders of my strength, each one a testament to survival and transformation. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I saw not a broken vessel, but a resilient soul reborn. The reflection held eyes that sparkled with a tentative joy and a soft determination that whispered, "I am enough." Around me, new relationships began to blossom. A network of allies and kindred spirits who had also been weathered by their own storms. Axel's steadfast presence, now interwoven with the caring voices of Whitney, Gabby, and others, created a tapestry of support that felt both modern in its unity and timeless in its compassion. Their shared experiences and whispered confessions had forged bonds that went beyond the superficial. They were connections built on mutual understanding and the promise of a future where no one would be left to suffer alone. I remember walking along a sunlit path, the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of a flowing stream providing a soothing counterpoint to my introspective thoughts. With each step, I recalled the arduous battles I had fought, both against external forces and the internal demons that had long held me captive. Yet, amid the echoes of my past, there was a growing awareness that every struggle had prepared me for this very moment of rebirth. The beauty of nature, the delicate interplay of light and shadow, the vibrant tapestry of flora, and the soft, ever-present murmur of life, mirrored my own journey toward healing. It was as if the earth itself was whispering a secret, that even the deepest wounds could mend under the patient care of time and tender compassion. In those moments of serene reflection, my mind danced between the bittersweet memories of what had been and the luminous promise of what could be. I found myself wondering about the future, about the kind of life that lay ahead if I continued to nurture this fragile hope. Could I build a sanctuary of trust and unconditional love? A place where vulnerability was celebrated rather than exploited. Each thought was accompanied by a gentle smile, a silent acknowledgement that while the path ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, I had already begun to reclaim the pieces of my soul that had once been scattered by cruelty. There remained, of course, lingering questions, a spark of mystery that kept the flame of possibility alive. What alliances would endure? What new challenges would arise as we all navigated the complex web of our shared existence? And most importantly, could love in all its tender, unguarded beauty truly heal the deepest wounds? These questions, rather than casting a pall of doubt, filled me with a curious excitement, a recognition that the journey toward emotional freedom was an ongoing process, one that promised both trials and transcendent rewards. As the day unfolded, I felt the promise of a new era, a time when the scars of the past would serve not as markers of defeat, but as symbols of the courage it took to rise from the darkness. The sun climbed higher, its light growing ever more brilliant, as if to banish the remnants of night forever. In that radiant glow, I silently vowed to continue this journey of healing, to embrace every tender moment, and to forge ahead with a spirit unbroken by the weight of former sorrows. In the quiet cadence of this new dawn, I sensed that our collective story was far from over. The seeds of transformation had been sown, and while the future remained a mystery wrapped in possibility, one thing was certain: a spark of hope had been ignited. And in that spark lay the promise of redemption, a promise that, with every breath and every step, we could rise again, reclaiming not only our lives, but our very essence. The journey toward hope and resilience had begun, and I knew that this was only the first chapter of a story that would continue to unfold in ways both unexpected and profoundly beautiful.